Добрый день.
Good afternoon, colleagues. We are glad to welcome you at the briefing of the Ambassador at Large of the Russian Foreign Ministry on the crimes of the Kiev regime. We are going to present new facts about the use by the Kiev regime of UAVs, of war crimes, attacks against civilian facilities and civilians, about the scale of Western sponsors participating in all of this. First, Mr. Miroshnik is going to present his briefing, and after you'll have an opportunity to ask questions, but I'm going to ask you to be centered on the topic of today's briefing in your questions. Thank you. You have the floor. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. In the context of the terrorist foray organized by the Kiev regime in Kursk region, we intend to present a compendium that we have prepared in 2 languages that contains statistic data and information about the bloody acts of AFU with the use of certain types of weapons. It is a given that new technological achievements right in front of our eyes drastically change the picture of war, creating new additional opportunities to successfully carry out warfare. But no technological process can replace conscience, morality, and universally accepted norms of international humanitarian law that humanity developed throughout the decades and that are the token of its civility. 75 years of the signing of the Geneva Conventions was celebrated just 2 days ago. Since this memorable date, the signatories committed to implement these conventions. But is there an exact date since when certain countries started to ignore these norms openly, and all the group of Western countries started to turn a blind eye on all of it? This is another topic that we are going to speak about. The use of various unmanned systems created plenty of new opportunities to achieve success and superiority on the battlefield, but it was the Kiev regime that started using all of this to commit intentional and deliberate crimes against civilians. This is what Nazi Germany did, using its developments in different spheres to create conveyor for mass murders of people in death camps. This is the similarity between Ukraine and Nazi Germany. And we're not only speaking about the crosses on the tanks that are now in the Kursk region as well. UAVs today are the second type of weapon after the artillery that is being used most frequently by the Kiev regime to kill and maim civilians in the Russian regions adjacent to the front line. Strike UAVs, FPV drones, suicide drones. When they're used to attack civilians, they're considered weapons of deliberate murder or deliberate attempt on the life and health of people. Drone operators can see very clearly the target that they have chosen. They can identify it. They can clearly distinguish a child from an armed soldier or a civilian car from a tank or an APC. In case of a mistake, they have an opportunity to move this explosive UAV aside, even in the last moment, but they don't do it. They deliberately attack a civilian, a woman, an elderly person, a child. Considering the analysis of hundreds of UAV attacks on civilians, we can state that they choose in advance the target that they're going to attack. They follow it from the drone and then carry out a deadly strike. The evidence of such strikes are the videos recorded with the UAV cameras, and Nazi butchers brag about some of them and upload them to the social networks, demonstrating to the whole world their so-called victories over defenseless civilians. Since the beginning of the 2024, the attacks of Ukrainian UAVs resulted in 723 people being injured, and according to our data, 124 were killed. In July alone, Ukrainian drone operators were responsible for at least 186 victims among civilians, 170 injured, 16 killed. In August, 73 people have become victims and 10 were killed. As of August the 1st, in July 2024, the most number of victims of Ukrainian UAVs among civilians was in the Belgorod region, 79 people, 6 of them killed. As for DPR, 48 civilians have become victims of the AFU drones. 5 of them died. The situation in the Kursk region has drastically changed in the recent days, taking into account the terrorist foray of Ukrainian units that actively use UAVs of different types to attack civilians. We have data that during the recent week, at least 13 civilians have become victims of Ukrainian drones in Kursk region. 4 died of them. And we know that some territories are being controlled by the Ukrainian forces, and maybe we don't know all the data about all the people that were killed. One of the most terrible phenomena is that children become victims of UAV attacks. A Ukrainian drone operator drops off ammunition when sees a child that goes with the mother, or when a group of kids plays in a yard, or when a child goes in a car with a family. Since the 1st of January till today, in 11 frontline regions, at least 43 minors have become victims, 34 injured, 9 killed, after the attacks of the Ukrainian UAVs. I'm going to give you several examples of cynical strikes of Ukrainian drones where children were the victims. The 11th of July, a Ukrainian UAV attacked a group of children in a residential area in the city of Shebekina in the Belgorod region. 5 children were injured and hospitalized. As for one of them, a 16-year-old teenager, doctors fought for his life during a week, but the boy died of wounds and it was impossible to save him. 10th of April, the village of Apanasivka in Kursk region, an Ukrainian drone attacked a civilian car, dropping off an explosive device on it. During an attack, a man and his 2 daughters, schoolgirls, Margaret and Yekaterina, were in the car, and all of them burned to death in a car that was attacked by a Ukrainian drone. The 29th of June, around 2 a.m., an AFU UAV attacked a single-family house and an adjacent piece of land in the village of Gorodishche of Rylsky district in Kursk region. The drones carried out 5 aimed drops of munition, and as a result, 5 civilians were killed. A family of 4, including a boy of 4 years old and a girl of 2.5 years old, and a young neighbor that tried to help them, he was also killed. His parents were also injured. According to the norms of the international humanitarian law, civilian medics cannot be considered as an object of an attack by the military in any case. During the first day of the Kursk provocation, the 7th of August, Ukrainian militants used a drone to attack an ambulance brigade that was going to the city of Sudzha to save civilians that were subject to Ukrainian shelling. The car of the medics had all the signs of an ambulance: red crosses on the sides, emergency lights indicating the status of an ambulance. However, exactly this car was attacked by a Ukrainian strike drone, and as a result, 2 members of the medical brigade were killed on the spot. A girl, an ICU doctor, survived, but she was severely injured and was brought to a hospital by another medical brigade. The 3rd of June, the city of Tyvrisk, Kherson region, Ukrainian drone chased an ambulance relentlessly. The driver, seeing a UAV that was following them, tried to get away from it, but despite the maneuvers, Ukrainian drone reached the medical brigade and dropped off an ammunition. As a result of an explosion, the driver received serious burns and injuries, and the ambulance burned down completely. And you can see the result of it on the screen. The fact of attacking the ambulances is not an exception to the rule, quite the opposite. These are deliberate actions blessed by the leadership of the Kiev regime. Since the beginning of this year only, during the 7 months, it was the 9th Medical Brigade that was attacked by Ukrainian militants. 23 medics have become victims, 4 of them died while performing their medical duty. Strike drones are being actively used by Ukrainian militants to track down and attack emergency ministry rescue teams. In such cases, UAVs circle over the place that they have already set on fire, waiting for firefighters and rescuers to attack them. These are methods of truly terrorist nature, and they are aimed at depriving civilians of the very hope for salvation. The shellings of major civilian facilities are now followed by Nazi UAV attacks that are trying to prevent help being provided to the victims. Since January to August this year, as a result of UAV ammunition drops and shellings, and during the elimination of the consequences of all of that, at least 71 rescue was injured, 39 of them by UAVs. Drones damaged at least 12 units of special equipment, 10 of them are fire trucks. In July, there were at least 8 attacks on rescue teams. As a result, at least 6 firefighters were injured. Ukrainian drones damaged 3 fire trucks and another one cargo truck. 12th of April, Nikitsky region of Gorlovka, firefighters extinguished a fire of a house that caught fire because of an explosive object dropped off by a drone. Then there was another UAV attack, and as a result, 10 rescuers of the Ministry of Emergency of Russia received different injuries of varying severity, and they were hospitalized. The next day, the 13th of April, this outrageous story repeated itself. Trying to save the house that caught fire because of a drone, the fire brigade again was attacked by a Ukrainian UAV. 2 rescuers were injured, 1 fire truck was fully destroyed, another one was severely damaged. Another trend that is growing exponentially in the latest months is the hunt of Nazi drones for civilian and public transport. Ukrainian drones circle over highways, track down civilian cars and other types of public transport. Then they strike them. That usually results in the full destruction of a car, damages public transport, results in killings or severe injuries to passengers. Just several days ago, a Ukrainian drone reached and attacked a civilian car in the Belgorod region. 2 women were inside. You can see on your screens the state of the car after the UAV attack. Both women were severely injured and they were evacuated to the nearest hospital. The most bloody attack on the Ukrainian transport of the Ukrainian UAVs in the recent months was an attack on the buses of the Agro-Belogorye group of companies in the Borisovsky district of Belgorod region near the village of Berezovka. In the beginning of May, AFU used 3 strike drones and to attack a civilian transport that was transporting employees of the pig farm and a civilian car that was nearby. As a result, seven employees of this company died on the spot. 43 people received injuries of varying severity, and after that, 2 of them died in hospital. They could not be helped. If we're speaking about attacks of Ukrainian UAVs against civilian transport, we can point out the attacks against civilian city trams in Gorlovka. Throughout 10 days, 3 city trams were attacked on the route. 2 out of 3 of them resulted in victims among civilians. In one case, a woman, tram driver, was injured. On July the 30th, An Ukrainian UAV attacked a tram that was moving along the street of Dmitrova in Gorlovka, and a 25-year-old guy, tram driver, was killed. This drone with a big explosive charge flew directly into the driver cabin, and the tram driver didn't have any chance to survive. 2 passengers and a 17-year-old girl that was in the nearby bus were also injured. The blame for the crimes that trample the norms and principles of IHL without any doubt is on the Nazi regime of Zelensky and those who carry out his criminal orders. But those who deliberately provide these merciless killers with the weapons to commit these crimes cannot be considered blameless. In February-March this year, NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg said that NATO is going to buy 1 million drones for Kiev regime. The UK and Latvia reported that they'll head the coalition on UAVs and will provide thousands of UAVs to Kiev. As for the drones that are being used by Ukrainian militants to attack civilian facilities, our experts have found inside of them spare parts produced in the US, Canada, and Sweden, and some other Western states. They did their best to provide a madman that despises IHL norms with new weapons for killings of civilians, of innocent people. Today we see a consistent trend towards the growth of the number of crimes committed by Ukrainian militants with the use of unmanned systems supplied by Western partners to attack civilians. These are high-profile crimes of the AFU that were committed absolutely intentionally with the use of UAVs in the recent days. I haven't mentioned them yet. Assassination attempt against the war reporter Yevgeny Podubny, setting fire to a cooling tower in Zaporozhye NPP, killing of an elderly woman in her apartment in Shebekina in the Belgorod region. Zelensky's bloody regime will be held accountable for all these crimes. All the facts that were presented will be published and given to our missions in international organizations with a demand to evaluate the actions of the Kiev regime and Ukrainian militants. We will also present them to our partners, presenting countries that have not stained themselves with support of a criminal regime of Zelensky and bloodshed in Ukraine, for them to understand more clearly the criminal processes that are happening in Ukraine right now. This is everything that I wanted to inform you about. We will publish the compendium in Telegram channels and on other resources. You will be able to access them in 2 languages, in the Russian and in the English language. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Miroshnik, for such detailed information. Colleagues, if you have any questions, please, you have the floor.
Здравствуйте.
Да, пожалуйста. Здравствуйте.
Good afternoon. Izvestia. Ambassador Miroshnik, what do you think? These mass strikes, are they an attempt to hurt Russia as much as possible before the negotiations? Well, I would like to split your question into 2 parts. First, there is an understanding that through these terrorist attacks in Kursk, Ukraine has all but paused for a long time the negotiating track. I think this was a deliberate action, because having negotiations with someone who commits such acts of folly is against nature. So the question our president has raised as to whom to talk to in the course of these negotiations is very much relevant. Next, Ukraine is carrying out deliberate strikes against civilians. We see that goal. It has been elevated to the level of Ukrainian strategy. UAVs are used to carry out strikes against civilians in order to sow discord, discontent, and fear, and also to foment discontent in Russian society. I think this is due to the fact that they lack any kind of understanding of this sentiment among the Russian citizens. among the Russian population, because this attempt of a breakthrough, this terrorist attack in Kursk Oblast, all of that makes people simply be more patient, and they want a harsh response to that against those who for many years have been pursuing the policy of discrimination against Russian people, against Russian-speaking people, those who identify themselves with Russia or with brotherly nations. So this policy is a deliberate policy pursued by Zelensky. It's a criminal phenomenon which is in clear violation of international humanitarian law. Thank you. If you don't mind, some more questions. What's your assessment of the official reaction of the Western countries with regard to the shelling by the AFU of Russian civilians? Well, my diagnosis is blindness and deafness. Sometimes Western countries are very selective in what they see, what they hear. Sometimes they pass their judgment on the humanitarian situation that we are witnessing within the area of hostilities. Just yesterday, there was an area formula meeting at the UN Security Council. The theme was the AFU crimes in Ukraine. The Western countries that appeared at that meeting were simply saying one and the same thing, as if it was rubber stamped and circulated to all of them. The essence of what they are saying is that we do not know what's happening there, we do not want to know what's happening there, but it's Russia that is to blame, and you're not going to convince us otherwise. So it's kind of an attempt at building a illusory world of their own, but harboring these illusions is not going to lead to a resolution of what's happening in Ukraine. So their reaction either to this terrorist attack in Kursk region or to previous crimes, we do not see how this reaction is going to play out. And yes, thank you. The last question: can we associate these UAV attacks with Kiev's desire to boost up the morale of their military, trying to transfer the hostilities deeper into Russian territory? Well, yes, this is something I would like to point out. There is a difference between the morale of the military and this bloodthirsty attempt to hurt civilians. These things should be distinguished between. The AFU right now are trying to cultivate this bloodthirst in their territory. They're trying to turn at least part of Ukrainian society into a herd that is thirsting for blood. We see the reactions on social media. We see the comments. Well, what other name can we give to those people who declare their desire to see the death of Russian citizens? We see the comments that are posted on social media, on other websites in Ukraine. And this radical sentiment is something that is cultivated from the central authorities, that is being fostered and reinforced by Zelensky's regime. This has nothing to do with the morale of the military, because this sentiment comes from the most ignoble, most basic instincts that the most radical part of Ukrainian society harbors. And this is something that the Ukrainian authorities, headed by Zelensky, are trying to exploit. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Next question, please. Moscow Post newspaper. Thank you. We've got two questions, if you don't mind. The first is something you've touched upon already, but maybe you'll add something to that. How many civilians in Russia have suffered of Ukrainian UAVs attacks throughout the conflict as a whole and during the incursion into the Kursk region, and what kind of UAVs is most dangerous to the civilian population. Well, citing the precise statistics of how many people have suffered since the beginning of the conflict is something that is going to be very difficult for me. I've shared some data with you. 723 people that have suffered since January the 1st, 2024, and 124 people. That is the data we've got, the verified data. These are the people that have died in the attacks carried out by Ukrainian UAVs. Unfortunately, the statistics can be even worse. We only share the data we are certain about, that we've verified through our federal or regional authorities. These are the data collected by the services that are in contact with me as ambassador at large responsible for the crimes of the Ukrainian regime. But the thing is, the statistics is getting worse. At the beginning of the conflict, it was just single individuals that suffered due to attacks carried out by Ukrainian UAVs, but starting from the end of 2023 and the beginning of 2024, that has turned into mass practice when UAVs are actively used by Ukrainian forces to carry out strikes against civilian transport. They also carry out attacks against agricultural equipment, tractors, for instance, or other special agricultural equipment in Voronezh, in Kursk, and Belgorod regions. They're also using UAVs against civilians, people who've got no protections. And this is a deliberate act that is perpetrated by Kiev. And in July, we have registered almost 200 attempts on the lives of civilians. So if this terrible impunity continues, unless we find a counteraction to that, this statistics is going to get even worse. And now, as for the systems that you've asked me about, we have analyzed a number of systems, UAV systems, that are used by the Ukrainian fighters. The most dangerous type of UAVs is the FPV drones. The cheapest ones are used for the shortest range. They are used to chase down civilian transport, civilian vehicles, individuals they catch sight of. They are highly maneuverable and they are very cheap, and there are thousands, tens of thousands of those drones that are provided to the Kiev regime by the Western countries, and these UAVs are actively used in Yasinovato, Gorlovka, Shebekino, Gravernovo, Krasnoyaruski district. So there is a 10-kilometer zone within which the highest number of attacks using FPV drones against civilians is registered. There are other FPV drones of an airplane type. They've got a higher yield of explosives, and they're used to penetrate deeper into Russian territory in order to carry out strikes against big industries, big industrial companies, trying to carry out strikes against NPPs or other critical infrastructure facilities. Sometimes these drones get sidetracked, and if they fall down, they can do damage both to civilians and to civilian infrastructure. But this is more or less what we are seeing. Thank you. Second question. What are the risks that cruisers ships of the AFU are going to attack Russian civilian vessels in the Black Sea? Have there been any such attempts before? Unfortunately, I do not have any precise data on whether that has happened. This is not within my remit, so you'd better ask my colleagues. But if we have a look at the broader picture, there is no guarantee that Ukraine is going to stick to any kind of norms. So our main principle, which we are guided by, is that Ukraine will be incapable of carrying out a strike if that's physically impossible, if they cannot reach this or that facility. If a facility, a civilian one, falls within their reach, there is a high chance that sooner or later Ukraine is going to carry out this strike perpetration, a crime violating the IHL. Unfortunately, however sad that might sound, currently Ukraine is under the protection of Western countries. They prevent any independent investigations into the violations of IHL. And very often, this is due to the fact that international organizations that are responsible for that have basically been appropriated by Western countries. They do not carry out an impartial analysis of what is happening. Rather, they are following what their Western masters are telling them to. So Ukraine is a monster which is incapable of observing any kinds of norms. So why would they stick to these norms when it comes to strikes against vessels? So I cannot be sure that Ukraine is never going to do that. Thank you for your reaction, for your comment. Thank you, Komsomolskaya Pravda newspaper. Good day. My question is as follows. Evidently, you've got up-to-date information on what's happening in Kursk region. What channels have you resorted to? Have you provided any information to our Western counterparts about what's happening there? What has their reaction been? Well, certainly we use traditional classic channels of information distribution. We provide all of the data we've got to international organizations where we're represented, the OSCE, UN, the Human Rights Council, and a number of other organizations which we're part of. Another important channel which we are using is our diplomatic missions, embassies located in other countries. We are trying to provide as much information as possible to those partners that have not besmirched themselves with providing support to the regime carrying out such atrocities. They're not providing either material or financial aid. So we're trying to provide as much information as possible to such partners that are not associated with the Kiev regime. And there are also special services that are in contact with their counterparts in the countries with which we have this special kind of relationship. The reaction is very telling. There are some countries that already stated their position. The US, Germany, this flagrant, brazen terrorist attack that Ukraine has perpetrated with the support of Western countries. So it has resulted in several countries supporting that, saying that Ukraine can't do that if the goal is to protect itself. So yesterday during the UN Security Council meeting, some countries such as the UK, France, have basically shown that they prefer to turn a blind eye to what's happening, to the foray, to the raid that Ukraine has perpetrated in Kursk region. As for the IHL violations, they still espouse the principle that if Ukraine is a son of a bitch, still it's our son of a bitch, so they prefer not to criticize it. They prefer not to notice any crimes that the Kiev regime has carried out. I'm sorry, and what about the non-Western partners? What's their reaction? Right now, we are involved in closed consultations with some other partners, and I think they will sooner or later state their reaction on what's happening. Well, at least yesterday during the UN Security Council session, a number of African countries, the Chinese People's Republic, and a number of other countries at least shared their concern about what's happening in Kursk region. Thank you. Thank you, colleagues. Does anyone else have any questions? Good day. Yes, please, introduce yourself. Olga, you first. I'll take the floor after you. Olga Begunova, Russian Vector of Strategic Importance. Ambassador Miroshnik, my question is as follows. To kill Russian civilians, Ukraine gets weapons from Western countries, and the US in particular. The US and other countries provide UAVs. They are also sending mercenaries trying to provoke a nuclear collapse at an NPP. And they show no sign of stopping. But there's only one hegemon on the planet, and that's the US. And when President Putin spoke at the Munich Security Conference in 2008, he said the US was the only center of decision-making. So is there going to be an official statement of who is the true originator of aggression against Russia, as it was done by Molotov on the 22nd of June, 1941? And does Russia have a mechanism to engage in negotiations with the US? Well, first, to an extent, I do not fully agree with your comparisons, because there is some difference between what's happening right now and what happened in June 1941. And when you say that we're not naming the true reasons and the true originators of the conflict in Ukraine, that's not entirely accurate. Yes, we have stated that the US and a number of other US partners or satellites are accomplices in the atrocious processes that happen in Ukraine. And we have stated on multiple occasions that without their support, their funding, without their active involvement, the conflict in Ukraine would have been impossible, nor would it be possible to continue that. Many speakers like Mr. Borrell and others have admitted that should the support be cut, the conflict would be over in several weeks. So without the Western support, this conflict would never have happened, nor would have taken the form it has now. And what about your second question? Does Russia have convincing political mechanisms to force the US and the West to a negotiating table? Well, there's nothing new about that. We have stated on multiple occasions that we're not okay with the US hegemony. We believe that a polycentric world is the guarantee of protecting the interests of other countries. We've always assumed that only due regard for the interests of different countries can help. And if there is a hegemon that decides using double standards how to assess this situation or that situation, that kind of hegemony only results in world crises. So we are advocating new centers of influence, new centers and sources, and this polycentric world is certain to emerge. This will set in place conditions for a better life on planet Earth. Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues. Please, in your questions, stick to the topic of today's briefing. First of all, we're speaking about the crimes of the Kiev regime against civilians and civilian infrastructure. Thank you very much. and the voice of Fatherland portal. Vladimir Putin said after the attack on the Kursk region, he said that the collective West wages the war against us using Ukrainians. Please say what actions against the West are going to be taken to stop this attack against our country. I think this is a very construct of a question of a global scale. This is we were speaking about the policy of our state right now. We do everything to protect our country. And I'm not going to give you the list of all the doctrines. So in our fight against all of this, we will see the results, and according to these results, we will act further trying to settle this conflict. Unfortunately, other attempts, for instance, negotiations, attempts to find other solutions to this attack in Kursk can be discussed or cannot be discussed right now. And this attack on Kursk by Ukrainian forces makes it almost impossible, doesn't give us any opportunities to hold negotiations with them. They take all the actions to use the weapons provided by the Western sponsors, and this way violate the international humanitarian law. So now we are focused on what is happening on the battlefield. I don't know if I should ask you this question, but there are long-term plans to fight against Russia. They have plans for several years. Does Russia have any long-term strategies to fight against such plans? Russia has its plans, its strategies, military doctrines, the plans of the foreign policy of the Russian Federation. These are our strategic plans that are presented in all the necessary documents, and I'm not going to give you the list of all these documents. We understand fully the situation that is now happening in the world, and I think that this is not the place to make any global conclusions about what is happening. Thank you. Please, Balt News. Good afternoon, Mr. Miroshnik. In September, Lithuania is going to provide drones to Ukraine that it has produced itself. Russia has a mechanism that has Russia any mechanism that records the number of and types of weapons that are being provided to Ukraine by the West. The volume of the military help that is being provided through the West by Western states, by Western coalition, is being recorded. And if we're speaking about the Baltic states, they have a radical position. They participate in different ventures. They are supporting the radical Kiev regime, and the task that they have been given by the Western coalition is to sing along these aggressive actions being taken by Ukraine and encouraging the Ukrainian aggressive actions that do not correspond to the reality. So this is a group of states that are also being financially supported by Western sponsors, their Western masters, that just do what they are told to do. Sometimes they implement different types of programs through these Baltic states. All the military and financial help is being provided through these states. If we're speaking about the share of the budget and GDP of the Baltic states, the money that is provided to the Ukrainian state, the Baltic states benefit most from it. So being some kind of an interface of the help provided to Ukraine, they are at the top. They benefit mostly from it. So in any case, they will come to Ukraine's help in any case, in any consequences. So another question. Not only financial help is being sent to Ukraine, but also people, soldiers. Is there any data about the number of Baltic militants fighting Ukraine? What have they done on the battlefield? We know for sure that they are there, but I cannot give you the exact number. I think the Ministry of Defense has more information about the militants on the other side. But Baltic states have spatial training centers where not only Ukrainian militants but also foreigners are being prepared because the number of Ukrainians is shrinking drastically. Unfortunately, I cannot give you an exact number, as I already said. I can only say that these states participate very actively, sending their own militants. Sometimes they're sending them to their deaths, or maybe they participate in other projects with the use of soldiers from the Baltic states. Thank you. Thank you. Colleagues, are there any other questions? If there are no questions, thank you very much for your attention. Thank you, Ambassador, and see you soon.